So, we're going to continue. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. ثم أما بعد. Um, so we just wanted to quickly summarize before we did move on, like what we covered in the chapter Shahr al-Quran or Shahr Ramadan, Shahr al-Quran, that the Quran is the month of, the month of Ramadan is the month of the Quran. So one, we covered that there's two types of revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down, or ways rather, that the Quran was sent down. The first being that it was sent down, right, in its entirety as one book, and that was from Bayt al-Izzah, which is perpendicular above the Kaaba, and it's in the lowest heaven, and it's analogous to the Kaaba in Mecca. For the angels, they go there, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran was sent from the preserved tablets down to that Bayt al-Izzah, the house of, or the abode of honor and dignity. And then of course, from there, the Quran, over the span of 23 years in the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, from the time that he turned 40 until his death, 23 years, in response to issues, problems, questions, events in the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the Ummah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there was revelation. So when they ask about the soul, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, right? When the Jews came asking Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about the soul, Allah tells him what to say. قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي, that tell them that the soul is from the command of your Lord, right? Or if they ask about anything else, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, and so on. So, but what we take from that being the 23 years, what we take from that is that one is that the Quran was responsive, right? Whenever there's an issue or a problem, the Quran has answers and solutions. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains why he went about it that way, right? To make the heart of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ steadfast and firm. Because when different issues and different problems came up, it was the Quran that alleviated the anxiety or the stress or whatever it is that the Prophet ﷺ was dealing with when he needed answers. The Quran came with those answers, granting his heart ease, granting his heart, right, tranquility. And then, right, the manner and the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Quran, speaks about the Quran, and even the different names and titles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the Quran, that it's the Furqan, that it's Dhikr, that it's Shifa, that it's Hudan, that it's Munir, right? That it illuminates the hearts and the minds of the Muslims, it illuminates their path, it is a distinguisher between that which is right and what is wrong. It is a book of instruction on how to live your life in the best possible way so that you can live this life with tranquility, with dignity, and bi'idhnillahi ta'ala to reach the hereafter safely. Then describe just in brief that the Prophet ﷺ had a greater and deeper relationship with the Quran, obviously all of the time, but even further and more so during the month of Ramadan, where he was reciting the Quran in its entirety with the angel Jibril, where the angel Jibril was reciting it to him, and he was reciting it to the angel Jibril alayhi salam, and that this was the precedent that the Prophet ﷺ set, right, to do every year. And then in the last year of his life, the angel Jibril came to him and they finished the Quran twice. And this precedence that the Prophet ﷺ set, that the Quran has a special relationship with Ramadan, was then taken up by the Sahaba, and then the generation after them, where they also would do the same. And so now, then we mentioned, I think the last thing was the hajr of the Quran, or abandoning the Quran, and how that can take different shapes and different hues in our life. So it could be, right, that you're just not reading the Quran or reciting the Quran. So again, so you should be asking yourself, am I abandoning the Quran in that way? If so, then what am I going to do about it? Is it with hajr al-amal bihi, like acting on the Quran in my daily life, that the Quran comes into play when I want to get married, when I want to get a job, when I choose a career, when I, right, in all these different facets of my life, am I acting on the Quran, or am I making a hajj? Am I abandoning the Quran in that regards? If so, what am I going to do to remedy that? And what am I going to do to fix that? And then likewise, I mentioned hajj on reflecting on the Quran. And this is something that I can't remember several months back, but we talked about that here at this masjid, about different things that we can do to have a relationship with the Quran and how we can reflect on the Quran. But this is something that is extremely important. Part and parcel of what will help you to reflect on it is reading the tafsir of the Quran or different tafsir. Some of the most common tafsirs you have Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you have Tafsir As-Sa'di, right? These are some important works that you should, right, try to go back to. I would say in particular, especially Tafsir As-Sa'di, it's very straightforward, and it's not very, it doesn't have like the asanid and chains of transmission. It just gets straight to the point. This is what the ayah means. This is what Allah is saying. This is what you need to do. Right? Tafsir As-Sa'di. And it's widely available. You can order it on even on Amazon, Darussalam, and even like PDF. But that will help you. But then also tadabbur should be like for your own personal self. Like, okay, I read this. This is what Allah told me to do. Now, how do I apply that myself in my own life? And what is that? And what am I going to change? What am I going to add? What am I going to remove? Right? You thinking and applying it in yourself, not just in a general broad sense, like, oh, this is what Muslims believe, or this is what they're supposed to. This is how they. No, it should be like, what does this mean for Ilyas? And what is Ilyas going to do, right, in my life? You should be asking yourself that. That's part and parcel of tadabbur with tafakkur. Anyways, and then the other part was tahakum, ruling by that. So there might be that you come into conflict, you had a business deal with a brother, and things are starting to fall apart, and y'all ain't seeing eye to eye. How are you going to handle that situation? Are you going to rule by what Allah and His Messenger said? Somebody's going through a divorce. Are you going to rule by what Allah and His Messenger said? The Quran, right? That's tahakum, right? Because we're all sitting here. None of us are government officials in an Islamic country. Obviously, it would be, they should be ruling by the Quran. That's what it means, tahakum. And there are times when people abandon that. They might be reciting it. They might even be reflecting on it. But when the opportunity comes in their life, then they might choose something else. And then lastly, he says, istishfa. Long story short, brothers and sisters, Ramadan is an opportunity to jumpstart. If you don't have a relationship with the Quran, it's an opportunity to jumpstart that relationship with the Quran. So every last one of us here should have some type of goal that we're trying to achieve this Ramadan, with reflecting on the Quran, reading the Quran, listening to the Quran. Might be listening less to the radio or NPR or whatever it is, listening to other things, and instead listening to the Quran, but trying to have a deeper, more meaningful relationship with the Quran personally. So that hopefully that will extend outside of Ramadan. So we go on to the next chapter. It says, Al-Ashru al-Awakhir, the last 10 nights of Ramadan. Now there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the Shaykh opens up with, that deeds, right, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ, right, that deeds are looked at, deeds are weighed, deeds are judged according to how you cross the finish line, bil-khawatim, how you finished off. Now we all know the famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that's true, that's in Bukhari. in other places, right? But this hadith is not as known, right? And so, obviously, in relation to it being talking about the last 10 nights, it's talking about like, how are you going to finish Ramadan? Because sometimes you may not have had the best start. Maybe you didn't, you should have, but you didn't fast in Sha'ban, you didn't prepare, you didn't, have things set up and ready, you didn't know which message you were going to go to, you were just kind of picking haphazard, so sometimes you made it, sometimes you didn't. Maybe you didn't read as much Quran, maybe you didn't do the things that you wanted, maybe you got into arguments and fights, you didn't eat no food, you didn't drink, but your Ramadan isn't feeling that spiritual, dimension to it. In the last 10 nights, it is still an opportunity, right, to try to finish strong, to make up for those things, right, and to try to recover, right? And if you already started off strong, and alhamdulillah, you've continued, right, you have you prepared and you have momentum, now you can finish strong, right? But either way, it's a benefit, right, no matter which way you slice it. Whether you had a bumpy start or whether you had a great start. Either way, it's an opportunity to help you finish strong. So, and this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. So he says, that the Prophet ﷺ mentions in another hadith, اغتنم خمسا قبل خمس شبابك قبل هرمك وصحتك قبل سقمك وغناك قبل فقرك وفراغك قبل شغلك وحياتك قبل موتك. It says there's 5 things that you need to pay attention to and you need to take advantage of before 5 other things happen. And the first one is your youth, before you get old and decrepit and gray-haired and a weak back and you're bent over and hunched over and now it's hard to, sit up and you got bad knees. Before you get old, take advantage of your youth. Secondly, your good health before you're sick, and before and take advantage of the time that you have money, the time that you have some type of wealth. Make sure that you utilize it for good, that you utilize it to take care of your responsibilities, to take care of yourself and those that are under your charge and your care and those around you before poverty strikes you. And then also your free time before you become busy and your life, take advantage of that before you die, because none of us know when we're going to die. And these are all things that more often than not people take for granted. The assumption that I got work tomorrow and I'm going to get up tomorrow, that I will apologize tomorrow, that I will forgive tomorrow, that I will make up for something, I'll make Hajj when I'm 60, I'll start wearing hijab later, or I'll start this, or I'll start this business, or I'll start this venture, or I'll start this project, or I'll start memorizing Quran, or whatever it is taken for granted that tomorrow is not guaranteed, not your life, not your health, not the economy, right? Taking advantage of your wealth before poverty. None of those things are guaranteed. There is only one guarantee. What's that guarantee, y'all? That's it. That is the only thing that is guaranteed. We don't know when, but it's guaranteed. And the irony is, all the other stuff we prepare for like it's guaranteed. Exams, tests, marriage, school, soccer tournament, like everything. We prepare for it like it's guaranteed. And then the one thing that's guaranteed, we prepare for it like, like that's not even an issue. It's not even on the radar, right? In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is trying to teach us, you need to flip that. You need to flip that. What you have, be in the moment. You got money right now, use it wisely. Use it for good. You have health right now, take advantage of it right now. You have free time right now. Why not start memorizing Quran right now? Why not start learning, sitting with a shed, go overseas, start that, whatever it is, start now. Because you don't know what happens tomorrow. but living in the moment and dealing with the reality that you have in front of you right now. It's very, very important. طيب, so he says, فأحسنوا ختام الشهر الكريم فإنه يلاحظ على كثير من المسلمين أنه كلما اقتربت نهاية رمضان كلما فترت عزيمتهم وضعفت همتهم، فترى كثيرا من الناس يبدأون شهر رمضان بحماس عظيم وإقبال على تلاوة القرآن وعلى صلاة التراويح وعلى فضائل الأعمال، ثم يقل عدد رواد المساجد شيئا فشيئا فكلما اقتربت نهاية الشهر. وهذا عكس ما هو المطلوب من المسلم، لأن المطلوب هو إحسان ختام الشهر لأن الأعمال بخواتيم، والمطلوب هو أن يزداد الاجتهاد في العبادة في عشر الأواخر. فعن أم المؤمنين عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت: كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دخل عشر الأواخر شد مئزره وأحيا ليله وأيقظ أهله. رواه مسلم. وشد المئزر كناية عن الاجتهاد في العبادة، وكناية أيضا عن ترك مباشرة النساء انشغالا بالاعتكاف والوصال. فإذا قصرنا في العشرين الأوائل فعلينا أن نكفر عن هذا التقصير بالاجتهاد في العشر الأواخر التي خير ليالي السنة، فلعلنا نتدارك الأمر ونصلح ما أفسدنا، ولأن عمر الإنسان ينقضي لا يدري أحدنا هل سيدرك رمضان المقبل أم لا، وإذا أدركه هل سيكون في قوته وصحته وفراغه حتى يستطيع الاجتهاد في العبادة أم ستعوقه العوائق. فاغتنموا حياتكم قبل موتكم، وصحتكم قبل سقمكم، وشبابكم قبل هرمكم، وغناكم قبل فقركم، وفراغكم قبل شغلكم، ولا تفوتوا هذه الفرصة العظيمة. واعلموا أن من قام مع الإمام حتى ينصرف كتب له قيام الليل كاملة كأنه قامها إلى الفجر. So now the Shaykh, he says, right, essentially that you see a lot of Muslims who start off Ramadan, they started off strong, they have a lot of excitement and vigor and zeal, but that includes their recitation of the Quran, their inclination towards good deeds and trying to get involved, trying to do everything that they possibly can. But the closer it gets to the end of Ramadan, the less they start doing. They start getting weaker. They start praying less. They start reading Quran less. They stop doing all those things that they started off real strong with. And he's saying it should be the opposite for the Muslim. It should be that, right, the way that we described the Prophet ﷺ earlier, right, that he was already the pinnacle, right, when it came to generosity, yet in the month of Ramadan, and at the end of Ramadan, right, he was like a generous wind that touched everything, that blows through and everything is, he feels that cool breeze. And that he somehow managed to take what was already the best and somehow still improve on that and make it better, that he was even more giving and more generous. And he's saying the Muslim essentially is supposed to be like that. That, all right, you started strong, right? And of course, most likely that is going to be due to you having prepared for Ramadan. And so you have a type of rhythm, right? And that rhythm, it's going to carry you, right? And then you have momentum. And then towards the end, so that you can that you start finishing with the idea that you want to finish strong. And so he says that, right? And then he points to that hadith because that's what's going to be looked at. So even if you wasted or you didn't have the best start to your Ramadan, he says it's an opportunity, right, to make up for that. And of course, if you already started strong, then this is a way to finish in the best manner. And then he described, well, what did the Prophet ﷺ do at that point? When the 10 days came in, and he mentions a hadith that's narrated in Sahih Muslim by our mother Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that, listen, when the last 10 days of Ramadan came in, the Prophet ﷺ, he tightened his belt, right? And he enlivened his nights, and he woke up his family, right? And the word shadda bi'zarahu, right, is an expression meaning to exert yourself and put a greater deal of effort in worship. And it can also mean that you leave off, right, engaging in intimacy with one spouse. So it means ijtihad, right? When it's the same as somebody saying when you got to get to work and they say we're going to roll up our sleeves, right, and we're going to get to work. It's the same thing, right? It means the same thing. That the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't look at it like, oh man, we done made it this far now we can chill and relax. No, if anything, he tightened his belt, and anything that might distract him from that, right? He distanced himself from that. And that included being intimate with his spouse. In the last 10 nights, what would the Prophet ﷺ be doing where he's not going to do that? He's going to be making itikaf. Worship. He's going to be worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? On that spiritual retreat. And so, the Sheikh is saying that what? You don't know if you're going to reach the next Ramadan, right? Matter of fact, how many people that you might know, a cousin, a relative, a friend, somebody who you regularly pray with at the masjid, that they were there with last Ramadan, and now we're only a few days out from Ramadan, this next Ramadan, and they're not here. Right? He said you don't know. So you take advantage of the opportunity that you have, and of course there's tremendous reward in doing so. Right? So for example, he says that when you pray with the imam, until they leave, right? Talking about Tarawih. And the Tarawih, when you pray with them, right? You get the same, and if you pray with them until they leave, you get the same reward as if you stayed and prayed until Fajr. Right? So he's saying, don't let this type of opportunity pass you by. So now we're on the 8th chapter, Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr. Now, of course, we know that Laylatul Qadr, it comes into the last 10 nights of Ramadan, right? And it is a blessed and sacred month that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hidden within those last 10 days. It is not known to us exactly which one it is. Part of the reason for this, though, and the wisdom behind this, is that حتى يجتهد المسلمون في جميع الليالي عشر الأواخر, right? It's to encourage us and the Muslims to search and to look for and to exert ourselves as much as possible, right, in all of those 10 nights, because you don't know which one it is. Now, there are some hints and some details that the Prophet ﷺ mentions that'll come up here, but essentially it's when you know that it's the odd nights, right, but you don't know which one it is. So then that means what? You're trying to I'm trying to hit that 23rd, I'm trying to hit that 25th, I'm trying to hit that 27th, I'm trying to hit that 29th, I'm trying to hit all of them. Not that I'm trying to roll the dice and bank on, all right, I think it's the 27th and I only do that, right? And in reality, you should be trying to exert yourself in all of those 10 nights, but it's trying to push us even more. So he says, تلك الليلة التي أنزل الله فيها القرآن, right? And that's the same night that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly mentions right there that this is the night where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the Quran, يعني في ليلة القدر. And what will let you know what is ليلة القدر? Right? تلك الليلة التي جعلها الله سبحانه وتعالى لهذه الأمة منحة منه لما تقاصر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أعمار أمته فأعطاه الله ليلة القدر وجعلها خيرا من 1000 شهر, أي العبادة فيها خير من عبادة 89 سنة. وقد وصف الله سبحانه وتعالى هذه الليلة المباركة بقوله ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. وقال فيها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من حرم خيرها فقد حرم. So the Shaykh, he said that the Laylatul Qadr is a night that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made for this ummah as like a type of reward, not reward, but alternative for them. لما تقاصر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أعمار أمته, when the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم mentioned how short the lifespan of his ummah would be, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him Laylatul Qadr, right? Because Laylatul Qadr, right, that one night is the equivalent to خير من 1000 شهر, 1,000 nights, or months, excuse me. And when you calculate 1,000 months in years, how many years is that? Y'all know by now, right? 83 something years. Gives, right? العبادة فيها خير من عبادة بضعة وثلاثين سنة. That the worship in that night is better than worship that takes place in 83 years. And 83 years, that's a lifetime. The average lifespan, right? The Prophet ﷺ describes his ummah as like 60 years, right? And even with good health care and so on and so forth, what, 70 years, 75 years on average, right? So that's a lifetime of worship, brothers and sisters. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you that window of opportunity in one night, right? So it's to be taken advantage of. And then, of course, he goes on to describe how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it, right, in the ayah in Surah Al-Qadr. And then he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ says, man, whoever misses out on that, مَنْ حُرِمَ خَيْرَهَا فَقَدْ حُرِمَ. Whoever misses out on the good of that night, indeed, they've been prevented from a tremendous amount of good. Right? They've lost out, huge. And there are a few signs, alamat, that are based on authentic source, on the authentic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regarding Laylatul Qadr. The first thing is that أنها ليلة مضيئة يشعر بذلك من كان في بادية أو خلاء ليس فيه أضواء صناعية. So he said it'll be a night that is illuminated, and someone would be able to feel that or sense that if they were in a place that was far away from like artificial lights. So like here, usually when you live in the city, there's all kinds of, street lights, street lamps, signs and stuff like that. And, that's just part of, city living. But the further you get out, either whether further in the suburbs or, out, when you're away from artificial lights, he said, right, that there's a type of illumination or light that you'll be able to see, right? That's one. The second one, لا حارة ولا باردة وهي علامة نسبية مقارنة بما قبلها وبعدها من الليالي. He said another sign is that it won't be either hot nor extremely cold, right? And he said this particular sign is somewhat subjective, nisbiyatun, and it's really going to be, you kind of gauge it compared to, right, the nights that came before it, right, and what it would be like after that, and the ones that are after that, right? So comparing it to those, but that it's not going to be too hot or too cold. And then the third sign is that لا يرمى فيها بالنجم, right? That there won't be any like shooting stars that night. And then the last one, تطلع الشمس صبيحتها لا شعاع لها بالإضافة إلى ما يستفاد من قوله تعالى سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر أن المؤمن يشعر فيها بسكينة وراحة بسبب كثرة تنزل الملائكة إلى الأرض. And this last one, how do you translate that word?
What is it?
Shi'a.
Shia?
Huh? Not Shi'a. Sheen, Ain, Alif, Ain. شوف كيف تترجم هذا؟ الترجمة يعني بالإنجليزي.
Rain.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, so there's not going to be any rain, right?
Rain, not rain, rain.
Rain.
R-A-Y.
Rain, like rain.
Rain.
Rain, like the sun.
No. تطلع الشمس. Yeah, when the sun comes out, there won't be any rays. Yes, there won't be any rays from the sun. And then along with that, there will be a sense of tranquility and harmony, right? Due to the numerous amount of angels that are coming down to the earth. And he mentions authentic hadith narrated by Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu ta'ala anhu. قال ليلة القدر ليلة بلجة لا حارة ولا باردة ولا يرمى فيها بنجم من علامات يومها تطلع الشمس لا شعاع لها. And that's in Musnad Imam Ahmed. So it just repeated what we just said, but that's where it comes from that hadith, right? So the Sheikh, he says, as much as you possibly can, try to make sure that you are looking for, exerting yourself in worship, in recitation of the Quran, you know what I'm saying, removing anything else that might make you busy, right? Especially in the last 7, right? Fi sab'a al-bawaqi. And that's because it came in authentic hadith in Sahih Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, التمسوها في العشر الأواخر فإن ضعف أحدكم أو عجز فلا يغلبن على سبع البواقي. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, listen, look for those days and try to do as much as you can in the last 10 nights. But if you somehow become weak or aren't able to do so, then make sure that you don't lose out on the last 7. On the last 7, right? سبعة البواقي. طيب. ومن الليالي التي يشتد فيها الرجاء أن تكون هي ليلة القدر ليلة 23, right? And one of the nights that it is a lot of hope is put into that it is that particular night, the 23rd night, the 23rd night of Ramadan. It's mentioned in a hadith that Abdullah ibn Unais al-Juhani أتى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله إن لي إبلا وغنما وغلمة فأحب أن تأمرني بليلة أدخل فيها فأشهد الصلاة وذلك في شهر رمضان فدعاه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فساره في أذنه فكان الجهني إذا كان ليلة 23 دخل بإبله وغنمه وأهله إلى المسجد إذا صلى العصر ثم لا يخرج عنه إلا لحاجة حتى يصلي الصبح ثم يخرج إلى أهله فقيل ليلة الجهني. So one of the reasons why, one of the most nights that it's most hoped that it is, and a lot of people think that it is that a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Unais al-Juhani, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, I have a lot of camels, I have, goats and sheep and whatnot." So, right, he's from the Badia, right? He's out there. And, it's not going to be as easy for him to be trying to tend to his grazing animals and to be coming to the masjid like back and forth every night in those last 10 nights. It's not easy for him. So he says, and I would love, right, فَأُحِبُّ أَن تَأْمُرَنِي بِلَيْلَةٍ أَدْخُلُ فِيهَا. So he said, I would love for you to tell me a particular night to come, right, where I come in to the masjid and I pray salat in the month of Ramadan. So the Prophet ﷺ, right, called him, told him, فَصَارَهُ فِي أُذُنِهِ, or فَسَارَهُ, like he told him secretly in his ear. And then after that, Juhani, every time he would come on the 23rd night, he'd bring his camels, he'd bring his sheep, he'd bring his family, right? And he would stay in the masjid from the morning, after the first Salat al-Asr until the morning. And so, and people obviously, they observed that, and he would not leave unless there was like some dire need. He wouldn't leave, right, until the morning Salah, and then he would leave after that, right? So basically the 24th, he would leave. So people would call that Laylatul Juhani. They would say Laylatul Juhani, right? And many people put their hope that it would be that is the 23rd night. But then there's another narration, right? Where it says, قلت يا رسول الله إني لي بادية أصلي فيها فمرني بليلة أنزلها إلى المسجد فأصلي فيه فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أنزل ليلة 23. No. So it's just another narration, but it's saying essentially the same thing. And then there are those who say, no, it's the 27th night. It's the 27th night. And this is another hadith that Ubay ibn Ka'b يقول وقيل له إن عبد الله بن مسعود يقول من قام السنة أصاب ليلة القدر فقال أبي والله الذي لا إله إلا هو إنها لفي رمضان يحلف ما يستثني ووالله إني لأعلم أي ليلة هي ليلة التي أمرنا بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بقيامها هي ليلة 27 وأمارتها أن تطلع الشمس في سبيحة يومها بيضاء لا شعاع لها. Essentially, one of the companions, he swears by Allah. He swears by Allah that it is the 27th night. It's the night that the Prophet ﷺ commanded us to pray in that time, on the 27th night. And some of the signs of it is that the sun will rise in the morning, right? And it's Yawmuha Bayda, and that it's white, right? And there's no rays coming from it, right? And Ibn Hajar, al-Asqalani rahimahullah, a notable luminary in Islam and tremendous scholar, in particular in the Hanafi, Hanbali madhab, he says, Hafiz ibn Hajar, he says, ورجحت طائفة أنها ليلة 27 وحكاه الثوري عن أهل كوفة وقال نحن نقول هي ليلة 27 لما جاءنا عن أبي بن كعب وممن قال بهذا أبي بن كعب وكان يحلف عليه لا يستثني. And I almost forgot to mention Ubay ibn Ka'b, when he was mentioning that, he used to swear by Allah. He used to swear by Allah that it was the 27th night, without exception. وزاد ibn Hubaysh and a number of other companions قال سألته زرا عن ليلة القدر فقال كان عمر وحذيفة وأناس من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يشكون أنها ليلة 27. أخرجه ابن أبي شيبة وهو قول أحمد نعم وغيره. So, what is the takeaway from this? The takeaway is Allahu A'lam. The takeaway is Allahu A'lam. Right? What we do know for sure, the last 10 nights. Laylatul Qadr, we know for sure, not in the first 20. Definitely in the last 10. We know for sure, it's one of the odd nights. We know for sure, in even more so, the last 7. Right? So starting from the 23rd onwards. Right? So what should we do? You should essentially make battle plans to exert yourself the entirety of that time. Because the Shaykh only mentions a few opinions. There are way more opinions than this. And there's a lot more debate and dialogue and discussion about Laylatul Qadr and which night exactly it is. But one thing that is interesting is that there are some scholars who say that it's not the same every year, that it moves around in those times, right? In those last 10 nights, in those odd nights. So the only way you can assure that you catch it is by doing what? Is make sure that you are exerting yourself in all of them, that you are busying yourself with ibadah, that you are, you know what I'm saying, if you gotta sleep less, then doing that. If you gotta, you know what I'm saying, if you can make it i'tikaf, that's even better, right? But trying to catch all of them. And that way you miss. No. Moving along though, so now we got Fasl al-Tasi', i'tikaf. And inshallah, this is one of the sunnahs of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, that he used to do in the last 10 nights. And the definition of i'tikaf is essentially to cut oneself off in the masjid with the intention of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's to cut oneself off, right? So, no visiting the family, not going to work, not going to school, nothing else. I'm staying at the masjid, right? With the intention of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an act of worship. The staying in the masjid, the remaining in it of itself, is an act of worship. And so, if we had to call it a term, you could say like a spiritual retreat. A spiritual retreat. And this is actually mentioned in the Quran, right, in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Ibrahim alayhi salam, after having built the Kaaba with his son Ismail alayhi salam, and he's making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's told, right, أن طهر بيتي للطائفين والعاكفين والركع السجود, and purify my house for those who are ta'ifin, والعاكفين, those who are making i'tikaf, والركع السجود, and those who are prostrating and making sujood. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is when he's talking about all the details about the rulings about fasting, the month of Ramadan. One of them is وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Right? And do not be intimate and have, foreplay with your spouses while you are making i'tikaf, or you're in a state of i'tikaf in the masjid. Right? So the point here is what? That it's mentioned in the Quran, and also on top of that, it's the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he used to do this every year, starting from the time that he migrated to Medina until he died. He used to do that every year. Right? يُوَاظِبُ عَلَيْهِ. وفاته الاعتكاف في سنة لعذر فقضاه. And there was only 1 year that he didn't do it, right? And he made it up, right? And he did so by making i'tikaf for 10 days in the month of Shawwal, which again shows how important it is. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ, right, when out of something that was outside of his control, he still made sure to make it up, even though it's not an obligation. The i'tikaf is not wajib, but that's how important it was to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So واعتكف في سنة 20 يوما, and there was 1 year where the Prophet ﷺ, he made i'tikaf for 20 days. وذلك أنه اعتكف أولا 10 الأواسط ويحسب أن ليلة القدر فيها فأراه الله سبحانه وتعالى أنها أمامه أي في العشر الأواخر فاعتكفها. So there was 1 year that the Prophet ﷺ prayed, made i'tikaf for 20 days because he thought, and he didn't know when Laylatul Qadr is, and he thought it was in the earlier part of Ramadan, right? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him that it is in the later part and not in the latter. And so he continued on with the 10 days, in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. Now, as far as i'tikaf and who is it allowed for? It is allowed for both men and women. I'tikaf is allowed for both men and women, right? Because the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, in his lifetime and afterwards, right, made i'tikaf. The wives of the Prophet ﷺ, in his lifetime and after his death, made i'tikaf. And they continue to do so well after he died. And that's in both Bukhari and in Muslim, right? The only condition when it comes to women is that there's going to be a proper, that the building or the space is set up for that, right? So for example, here, we couldn't have women and men, right, making i'tikaf in this room, in this musalla, right, alone, right? Where there's, some brothers in the corner over there, some sisters in the corner over there like that, right? But, alhamdulillah, this space, you have multiple rooms that are separated, and if I'm not mistaken, they can be closed, right? Yeah, that are separated, right? And so as long as there's separate spaces, right, where they have privacy and there's no fitna, there's no mixing, right, then the women can also make their i'tikaf as well, right?
But for the salah, they can be together.
We'll talk about, yes, yeah, for the salah, obviously they'll be together. But we're talking about, obviously, when you're staying all day, you know what I'm saying, going to sleep, etc., right? Then they need to have the proper facilities. طيب. والاعتكاف في المسجد له فضائل كثيرة كل فضيلة منها حرية وحدها بأن يحرص المسلم عليها وعلى المعتكف أن يستحضر في نيته هذه الفضائل حتى يحوز أجرها بإذن الله تعالى فمن فضائل الاعتكاف. So now the Shaykh, he's going to say, he mentions that there's numerous benefits and virtues and blessings of making i'tikaf. And he's going to mention Allahu Akbar, 10 of them. So we'll just try to go through them quickly. One is that you're completely freed up for Laylatul Qadr, right? And that you are in the masjid, right? And you're freed up to be making ibadah, making worship, and trying to catch Laylatul Qadr. Alhamdulillah. Secondly, you're following the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And no doubt, anytime you're doing that, that's the best thing that you're doing, is following the manner and the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the second thing. And obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. And most certainly, emphatically, definitely, you have in the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the best exemplar, the example who deserves to be followed. Number 3, ازدياد أجر العبادات عندما تؤدى في المسجد. That there is reward, your rewards are multiplied and increased, right? For the worship that you're doing in the masjid. So for example, somebody who prays at home, right? And the person who prays at the masjid, the ajr is not the same. There are multiple hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, in some narrations says it's 25 times better or 27 times better to pray jama'ah in the masjid, right? So now imagine if you're doing everything all the different acts of worship that you're doing in the masjid, whether it's the recitation of the Quran, the prayer, etc., right? Most likely you'll be praying in the front row for the brothers. So all of that is increasing the ajr and the reward of your worship. Fourthly, that you're ensuring that you're going to pray all of the prayers in jama'ah, right? Oftentimes, living daily life, there's a struggle with that. There's a struggle that comes with that. If I'm at work, right, it's not easy for me to do that. If I go to work early in the morning, it might be hard for me to pray fajr at the masjid, if it's etc. But now, if you're in the masjid, staying at the masjid on this spiritual retreat, alhamdulillah, all of that is cut off, and you're going to be praying in the masjid, all the prayers. Then he says, al-muhafadhatu ala ada' salawat fi awwal waqtiha, praying those prayers in their earliest times, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that being the best of Islam, right? When he was asked, what's the best of Islam? He said, as-salatu ala waqtiha, to pray the prayer in its time. And of course, the best time is the earliest time, like as soon as the prayer comes in. المحافظة على إدراك تكبيرة الإحرام مع الإمام. So all of these are related to essentially praying on time, praying in the first row, praying in jama'ah, praying with the imam when they say takbir, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions about making ihram, takbiratul ihram, excuse me. You being there when the imam says that. That man adraka takbiratul ihram ma'a al-imam 40 yawman kutibat lahu bara'atan, bara'atu min al-nifaq wa bara'atu min al-nar. Allahu Akbar. Prophet ﷺ says that whoever makes takbiratul ihram, and y'all understand what the term takbiratul ihram? So takbirah means saying Allahu Akbar. That's what the word takbir is from. Allahu Akbar. And ihram means haram, right? So takbiratul ihram, that's the first takbir that you make when you're entering salah, meaning now it's haram for you to talk, it's haram for you to move, it's haram for you to, right? That's why it's called takbiratul ihram. All those other things that you normally do, for the time being, they're haram for you. You can't be doing those things. You're in a state of worship right now. If the Prophet ﷺ said, if you were to catch that takbiratul ihram with the imam 40 times, obviously that's not 40, but 40 times, there are 2 things that are written for you that you are free from. One is that you will be free from nifaq, because obviously munafiqun, hypocrites, are not going the extra mile and the extra distance, not simply to pray, but to make sure that they're in the front row with the imam as soon as he says Allahu Akbar. But munafiq's not going to do that. So that's one thing that's written for you. You will be free from that. And then number 2 is that emancipation or freedom from the hellfire. Right? Because again, somebody doing that, exerting themselves, making that effort, who's going to do that except a believer? Right? And then he goes on, salat ba'da salat. There's a number of virtues that are mentioned about waiting after the salah, making dhikr at that time, making dua at that time, that the angels are there making istighfar for the person who does that. So long as you're sitting, like you pray fajr, and you stay there, and you make the morning adhkar, for example, you don't move. The angels are there with you, making istighfar for you, asking Allah to forgive you, have mercy on you until you get up, right? That's another virtue. And then obviously when you come to the masjid, right, when it's time to eat, y'all gonna be cooperating, working with each other, reading Quran, could you listen to me, making dhikr, listening to halaqas, etc. All of this like cooperating and working together, helping each other, That's a ta'awun ala al-birri wa taqwa. Now, then he goes on, الإيثار في فضل عظيم في أمور الطعام والشراب. And these are all things that I already just mentioned. But the point though is that what? How many times do we complain in our daily life about too much social media, too much connections, I'm in too many groups, watching too much, I have too many different things, I'm so busy, I got all these kind of responsibilities, I got this I gotta do, I got that I gotta do. Oftentimes when you ask people, that's what they'll say, man, I'm busy, man, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. Many of us, we complain about that, and then i'tikaf, if you can do so, right, is an opportunity and a chance to unplug, right, and to recharge your iman, right, in a big way. Because imagine not looking at social media, for example, for 10 days. Not uploading anything, whether you're doing khayr even, and not even looking at it. So, not being told by the algorithm what you're supposed to think about, what you should want to buy, what you should be watching, what you should look at, right? That's removed. And then even for a moment, for a brief moment, right? You set up everything so that you got at least some alleviation from your responsibilities. Like, I don't have to think about this because I set up my family, they got food at the house, I got prepare, all that stuff. So I don't have to worry about that right now. I'm just here at the masjid, taking care of this, and alhamdulillah, in case of emergency, they can call me. But other than that, my mind is free, so I can just focus on this. Right? You don't have to wait for Umrah to get something like that. Many of us, we say, oh, we'll get that in Umrah. You don't have to. You can do this. Matter of fact, i'tikaf, you ain't even got to wait till for Ramadan. You can make it i'tikaf outside of Ramadan. But especially in Ramadan, there's all these other virtues. You're being supported. There's other people who are making i'tikaf. You're pushing each other, etc. But if you could, even it doesn't have to be the full 10 days. You can make i'tikaf 2 days on the weekend. That might be convenient for you, your work. Like, you know what? Me and the wife, we're going to make i'tikaf for the masjid. We're going to come, alhamdulillah. Sister side, you got everything you need, alhamdulillah. Kids is acting with grandma, and khalas. Or, if it's just a brother, come a few days, 5 days, whatever it is. But I would strongly encourage everybody, right, to try at least a couple of days, 1 or 2 days. Obviously, everybody's situation is different, but there's a huge, huge benefit and reward, right? That you freeing your mind from being busy from so many different things. A lot of times, we want to be more connected to Allah. A lot of times, we want to feel more spiritual. There's so many dang distractions that get in the way. There's so many different things. And this is an opportunity and a chance, right? Even for a brief day or two, man, even if you couldn't do the whole day. Get your stuff set up, go to work, get off work, come to the masjid with your sleeping bag or your whatever, that night, until Fajr. Even if you could do that, right? I would strongly encourage everybody to do that, inshallah. And then, of course, they allow it, this masjid, right? They have, right? So if you want to make it i'tikaf here, alhamdulillah, they got a kitchen, they got facilities, mashallah, tabarakallah. Anyway, but so, moving on. And I want to make one disclaimer. There are 3 chapters left. That last one, about what's after Ramadan, that one I will not read, right? That one I won't. We can, towards the end of Ramadan, we'll talk about that. We'll be here at the masjid. We'll leave that last one. But these last 2, we'll finish quickly, inshallah. Zakat al-Fitr, right? This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He legislated at the end of Ramadan, when you finish, this tremendous ibadah. And it, in and of itself, is also a tremendous act of worship. And it's sadaqah, that one of the types of sadaqah that are an obligation. And it is تدخل في عموم أدلة فضل الصدقة والإنفاق في سبيل الله. And it comes under the category of all the different virtues and blessings that are known about giving charity, supporting the poor, helping others, it being a means of purification for your wealth and even for your nafs, right? Disciplining your soul, right? To let that dollar bill go and to give it away, knowing that you're not gonna get something physical, tangible right away. You're not gonna get nothing back, right? There's a benefit in that for yourself and your soul. All of the general discussion about sadaqah and the virtues of it apply to zakat al-fitr, right? So he doesn't go into a lot of details about that. But he just mentions وَشَهْرُ رَمَضَانُ وَشَهْرُ الْجُودِ. It is a month of generosity and giving. It is a month that, like we already mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ was especially giving all of the time, and even more so in Ramadan. And we should also be trying to do the same. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in His glorious book, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. So this word, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى, that their success is already guaranteed. And who's the one that their success is already guaranteed? Because Allah is speaking about it in the past tense. And He's saying with the word qad, that it's guaranteed, is the one who purifies. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. And not only do they do that, but they mention and remember the name of their Lord, right? And they pray. And tazakka is in reference to giving zakat al-fitr. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ أي كبر بتكبيرات العيد. Right? On Eid, what are you supposed to be saying as you're going to the masjid? So actually, it's the sunnah to be saying that, not just when you get to the masjid and you're with everybody and they got the microphone and everybody's repeating after them. Actually, when you get up that morning, when you're getting ready, maybe you have to, and you get in the car, along the way, you should be saying that, right? You, yourself, your family, right? You should be doing that until you get there, and then once you get there as well.
Starting in the morning or Maghrib time?
Now, yes, it started before, but I'm saying typically in the morning, right? Nobody does that on the way, right? You don't see nobody doing that, right? They'll be driving up, pulling up and stuff, and nobody does it. Until they get there, then they sit down, and then they're like, all right, Allahu Akbar, Allah. And that's what everybody does, right? Now, jazakallah khair. Play, and he says, and then the rest of the ayah, he's given the tafsir of the ayah. Tazakka, meaning give the zakat. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ, make it takbirat for Eid. فَصَلَّى, a salat al-Eid, that they pray the salat al-Eid. Now, zakat al-fitr is a sha'ira, ظاهرة من شعائر الإسلام. وقد فرض الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم زكاة الفطر طعمة للمساكين وطهرة للصيام من اللغو والرفث، ومقدارها الذي حدده النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم هو صاع من التمر أو الزبيب أو القمح أو الشعير أو أقطع. وذهب جمهور العلماء إلى أنه يلحق بهذه الأصناف كل طعام يكال ويدخر كالأرز والذرة والدقيق والعدس والفول واللوبيا. So, anyways, he says that it is one of the clear, and not signs, but those things that are representative of Islam. And he says, and it was made as an obligation on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we're supposed to give it for the poor, and it's supposed to be a means of purification for those who are fasting, and it's supposed to be a purification from for ourselves, and the amount that we're supposed to give is what's known as a sa'a, either of tamar or zabib. So obviously, zabib are raisins. Qumh, which is like wheat and flour, right? And then there are a number of scholars who've gone with the opinion that anything that essentially is weighed and can be dried, right? Any dry foods, so rice can also be given. Daqiq, we said flour, adas. What's adas? Lentils. Huh? Adas?
Is that it?
Adas is lentils. And then food, obviously, just food, but all of these things, they can be given in places, essentially like dried goods. You know, like when they have a food drive and they tell you what to bring, right? Obviously you don't bring cooked food, you bring dried, canned foods. That's what you can give. right? And he says, وصاع مكيال 9 لأربع غرفات كل غرفة ملأ كف الرجل المعتدل ووزن الصاع لا يزيد عن 3 كيلو جرامات ومقدارها من البر كيلوان و40 جراما من البر الجيد. All right, so he starts mentioning or breaking down the details of how much is a sa'. He says, right, مكيال يتسع 4 غرفات كل غرفة من كف الرجل المعتدل. So one sa' is going to be 4 handfuls of an average sized man, right, like this, right, 4 times, that's one sa'. That's how much you got to give. Give or take though, as last time I checked, you know, we're not really dealing in dry goods like that. Although obviously if you can't give it that way, alhamdulillah, that's best. That's what the Prophet said, right, described that you can do, which we should do. But most of us are giving it in cash, right? Most of us give it in cash, where you either give it to an organization or whatever, and in the organization, they should be giving it as food, as described. They can't be giving cash. They have to give it in the form of food. And then as far as how much that is, how do you equate that with what's being discussed here, right? Oftentimes, your masjid will facilitate, or an organization will facilitate exactly how much that is. Obviously, it changes slightly, give or take. It's anywhere between $10 to $15. Give or take, it's between $10 to $15. However, what I would recommend and what I would suggest is that if you can give that food, if you can go and buy that food, and if you can go find somebody who needs that food, that is best. And you give it on your own, as opposed to giving in cash to an organization who's going to give. That's acceptable, alhamdulillah. That's, many scholars say that is acceptable, but it will hit a lot different if you see somebody who's in need and you hand them the food. That's a lot different of an experience, as opposed to you're far removed from the person. You don't know who that who is that gets it, and just some cash was just exchanged of some money, and you just forget about it. No.
So it just has to be dry food completely, so nothing cooked at all or anything, right?
No, not cooked. So not like going and buying a meal and then giving them the meal, for example.
Don't y'all like pre-made food, like that's already in the can and everything, so that doesn't count either, right?
What do you mean pre-made?
Like at Holy Land, they kind of got like something that's already cooked. You just heat it up. Like you gotta cook it, but at the same time, it's just, you know, yeah, it's like kind of pre-made. It's not dry, but it is.
No. I would stick to what is dry. That's what it says. That would be the best thing, right? Because then it's on that person to use it and cook it.
Does the person you're giving it to have to be Muslim?
It should be Muslim. Should be Muslim. It's a holiday. Consider this. It's a holiday. You celebrate. You happy. You eat. Most likely, soon as you sign up to Allah, some people don't even stay for the khutbah. Okay, but let's say you stay for the khutbah. And then after that, what you most likely finna go do? You finna throw down. You finna eat. You finna eat, and you finna eat all kinds of foods that you probably didn't even eat the whole Ramadan. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Your Muslim brothers and sisters, actually, who they may not have that same luxury. So they gotta eat too. They should be enjoying at least somewhat of the festivities that we're all enjoying. Right? And them being hungry should not get in the way of that. Especially those who are around us. No? Yes, so it should be Muslim. No. No. And then the Sheikh goes on to say, all right, well, when is the time that you should give it? كان يزكي oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Who should the zakat be given on behalf of? So it should be given on behalf of every member of the household. Every member of the household. So if there's 5 people, and let's say we went with the $10, it's gonna be $50, right? And even if someone is pregnant, if a woman is pregnant, right? كان يزكي عن الحمل ووقت إخراج الزكاة قبل عيد بيوم أو يومين أو ثلاثة. So they used to give, even if a woman was pregnant, they would give on behalf of that infant, right? Or the baby before it's born, right? So every member of your household, zakat should be given for it. You good? Halas. So yeah. And then as far as when it should be given, if you can, it should be either right, either 1 day or 2 days or 3 days before Eid. 1 day or 2 days or 3 days before Eid. That's best, right? Obviously, so that they can actually have the food, you know what I'm saying, on the day of Eid, right? As opposed to what you oftentimes see, you give the, like they go to the masjid or they go to wherever it is that they're praying Eid, and then they give it to them like right there. So usually what that organization will do, and I used to work for a nonprofit for like 5 years, so typically what we would do, a typical organization would do, is they will give that food to people in advance. They'll give the food to the people, right? And then, right, then they'll take the money. So they'll oftentimes they'll have the food, right? That's what our organization I used to work for. That's what they used to do. So they would give the food, right, and then they would take the money afterwards, right? So that it would reach them, right? Even though the money's coming after, right after that time. Anyways, but like I said, to get around all of that, if you can, just give to, you know what I'm saying? It's best to give it yourself and to give it with your own hands. And I would say, especially if you have kids, that you take them with you so that they can see that. So then the Shaykh, he goes on, وَوَقْتُ الْفَضِيلَةِ, right? يَنْتَهِي بِصَلَاةِ الْعِيدِ. So the time that it is acceptable to give that zakat is until the salah, right? Then it ends at that time, right? It ends at that time. ويبقى وقت الجواز ممتدا إلى غروب الشمس يوم العيد فلا يجوز تأخيرها عن غروب الشمس يوم العيد. Right? So the best time to give it, he just mentioned, right? A day, or 2 days, or 3 days, and even it's still acceptable up until the Salat al-Eid. At that time, you still can give it, but that's not the best time. And then he says, وَوَقْتُ الْجَوَازِ, the time that's still allowed is until غروب الشمس يوم العيد, the setting of the sun on the day of the Eid. Right? تأخيرها عن غروب الشمس لا يجوز يوم العيد. He said, and then to delay it any later than that is not allowed. Right? فإن أخرها عن غروب الشمس آثم وصارت دينا في ذمته وصارت قضاء ولا يجوز عند جمهور الفقهاء إخراجها مالا إلا على سبيل توكيل بأن يدفع المال لمن يشتري به طعاما ويوزعه على الفقراء طعاما لأنها عبادة والعبادات توقيفية. So he says, it is not allowed for you to delay it beyond the setting of the sun, and you are considered sinful, and it is now a debt on you that is on your responsibility, and you have to wasalat qada, and now you're actually just making up for that. And it is not permissible, according to the majority of scholars, legal jurists, right, to give it out as money. You can't just give money unless you are giving it, as I already explained, to an organization or someone that you're entrusting, right, to do so, and that they are going to buy food and give it out as food to the poor and the needy, right, because this is an act of worship, and that is, and all acts of worship are tawqifiyya, meaning that you cannot Tawqifiyya, it means to stop, but like you can't add or subtract. You just got to do it the way that it is. You can't change it. Like, well, it's 2024. Can't we just? No, this is an act of worship. You cannot modify it. Fajr is 2 rak'ah. You can't. It's tawqifiyya. You can't change it whatsoever, right? But I can handle more. You know what I'm saying? I had a lot of coffee this morning, or I'm just an early I'm an early riser. No, 2 rak'ah. That's it. You want to pray extra? You can pray extra, but you cannot change. And similarly, when it comes to how you give it out, you cannot change the fact that it has to be done in food, right? And he goes into further discussion about that. والذي أراه جواز الأخذ بهذه الرخصة لحاجة بهذه البلاد المذكورة. Now, and we'll forego that discussion because we just explained that it's tawqifiyya, so we need to go into details about differences of opinion. And the 11th chapter, Eid al-Fitr. He goes into a lot of details. I'll let y'all read that. I just want to give you some general advice when it comes to Eid, right? Because it's only like a few pages, right? The fact that Eid is a holiday, it is a celebratory time, it is a time for us to enjoy, it is a time to be happy at the fact that you just finished this tremendous act of worship, right? And that's a fadl and a virtue and ni'mah from Allah. And so it's a time to enjoy that, right? And relish in the fact that, alhamdulillah, we finished, we crossed the finish line. And so on that day, as far as general advice, is number one, is that you should go out of your way to make it feel like a holiday, right? Now, you have different cultures, you have different ways of making that feel like a holiday, but definitely for sure, it should not be you go to work, it should not be you go to school, it should not be it's just a regular day like business as usual. And I'll be like, I'll celebrate, I'll go to the salah and then I go to work, or I'll do this and then and it should not be that, right? Can you imagine, right, people going to work on Christmas? Can you imagine people doing that, right? School is shut down, government is shut down, work is shut down. Like most stores, you can't even go to the grocery store on Christmas. Why? Because that's their holiday, right? This is our holiday, right? So definitely, that's one. It's definitely not, it should be an event.